Okay.
So this is Vincent Lihan, our PYP coordinator. So the PYP coordinator for Fukuoka International School. And today we are talking about planning. Okay. My first question is, how often do you plan lessons? Do you plan them one at a time or in chunks?
Okay. When it comes to, it depends on what subject we're doing. So if I'm doing a PYP unit of inquiry class, we would plan it as more of a broader lesson. So it might take 2 or 3 days to do it, but we would then break it down into smaller chunks into classes. If it's a language class, it's usually one period that we plan for, but it might take longer than that to do. So we might do, let's say if we're doing, at the moment in my class I'm doing narratives based around human migration. So it's something that we plan in a period what we want them to do, but it might take them 3 or 4 lessons to actually get the whole project done. So it's not really, I don't plan every 40-minute chunk as a 40-minute lesson. It might be that 40 minutes could be part of a much bigger lesson.
Okay. Another question. How far in advance do you plan your lessons?
Right, so it depends. If we're doing, so we have a unit of inquiry that lasts around 6 weeks. So I will have a rough idea of what I want to do in those 6 weeks. But again, the way it's structured, it depends on what the students' interests are. And so we'll always have a focus. There'll always be a reading strategy. There'll always be a writing genre that we're going to do with them. So we will plan those out and kind of know exactly what we want the kids to do. But how we go about it changes daily. Okay, so we will look at what the kids are able to do in a lesson. Okay, do we need to do some more front loading with them? Do we need to actually extend more kids on further? Is there any way we can change it up? We are in a school with a lot of ELLT kids. Okay, so they need a lot of support. Sometimes we might need to change that lesson up a little bit. So I will plan a week in advance, okay? But then I will look at it nearly every single day. So sometimes you go into class and you get a lot more done than you're expecting. The way the IB is, you go with what the kids want, so you don't actually have to stick to the lesson plan 100%. Okay, if you find that they are talking about something interesting, you can go with that for a little bit as well. There's always an end goal in sight. We always know exactly what we want them to do at the end of the unit. We know what skills they want to be able to accomplish, but it changes as the weeks go by.
What planning template do you use? What are the main parts of your lesson plan?
If it's for a lesson, I usually start with, like, I'll have an introduction, and then there's the main body of the lesson, and then we do a plenary at the end. So like the introduction would only ever take a few minutes. It could be a discussion, it could be, let's recap on what we did last week. Let's look at what do we need to do to be successful in this lesson. If it's something new, it could be an introduction to that. Okay, it could be a video, it could be reading a book or something. And then I try to get the kids working as soon as possible, so they will all start working, whether it's individually or whether it's in groups or whatever they're doing. And then I will be free then to wander around the classroom, and I will do mini lessons with them, or I might pull one student, or I might work with a student or work with a few students. It all kind of depends on that. I try to end my lesson most of the time with a formative assessment, but like a very, very quick formative assessment. So it could be me asking a question. It could be, I do ticket out the door, so they have to write a response to a question I've given, or write like what they're feeling. If it could be a thing like today, for example, we did like a square is what you find important. The love heart was what are your feelings. The circle is what are you still wondering about, and then the triangle is what was the best part of the lesson today. So it gives you a very, very quick snapshot of where the kids are and who's struggling a little bit, who needs a little bit more support as well. So they're my 3 parts of the lesson, really.
Okay, you're ahead of the game. You're answering questions that I had as number 7, 8.
Okay.
Okay. What do you have in mind when you start planning a lesson, the objective or the assessment?
When it's anything to do with the unit, you do have the final assessment in your head all the time. But I really go with the skills. Like, we want to know what skills they need to be good at to achieve that at the end of the assessment. So when I'm planning a lesson, we will look at, I might pick like a line of inquiry. Okay, and we'll dig into that. We'll we'll investigate it a little bit more. We might do some research on it, but like I'll always look, are we looking at social skills, or are we looking at communication skills or thinking skills? So I'll always have that in my head so that I can structure the lesson around that. I want to be able to see at the end of the lesson that the kids are using these skills, so that I know exactly where we have to go to next, okay? What else I need to practice? How can we develop these skills a little bit more, just so that they're ready for the end of the unit. So I always do have the end of unit assessment in my head, okay? But the main thing that I'll be doing during lessons would be the skills.
Okay. What documents do you consult when planning your lessons?
Start with the long-term plans. So I start with like our yearly overviews. So if it's math or language, we look at those. And then, for example, a language lesson might also be part of the social studies. So I'll look at what we're doing in language. I'll look at the social studies work as well and see what outcomes we're looking at there. So they're like our long-term plans, and then our medium-term plans would be the unit of inquiry. So we will look at what do we want them to do in this, and then I will kind of take bits from each one of those and put them into a lesson plan then. So for myself, I will have a weekly plan, but then I'll also have a lesson plan as well every day. So it would look at, are we doing a little bit of what social studies and what language we can do together, or are we bringing in some of the PSPE? Are we doing something on identity? Are we doing something on interactions? Or maybe if you're doing a science lesson, you'd have to look at the science plus the math plus the unit of inquiry, and you kind of pull everything together so that one lesson, it's not technically a language lesson. It might be a language lesson, but it might have social studies attached to it, or it might be a language lesson and there could be some PSPE attached to it, or there could be some arts. So there's quite a few documents you have to look at before you actually end up planning your entire week together.
Okay. What other teachers do you collaborate with when planning your lessons?
Okay, so I will collaborate with Brian a lot. So in this school, I'm actually sharing grade 5 with the principal as well. So the two of us would work together a lot. And then we look at all the specialists as well. So we have time set aside every few weeks to meet with the arts teacher, with the music teachers, with the PE teachers. And then because we're in a PYP school, we're the science teachers and the social studies teacher. So we will talk with those. It all depends on what we are doing. So like some units you might be looking at a lot of PSPE. So you might be looking at the PE teacher could be doing interactions, but the homeroom teacher could be doing identity. All right. And then we also, it's like conversations in the staff room or conversations across the school when you speak with a teacher like, oh, I'm doing this, have you any ideas of what we can do? So there is a lot of collaboration. It's actually really important that you're talking with people in your grade group, you're talking with specialists, but also it's really good to use teachers the year above you, the year below you across the school, because everyone has really good ideas. So it's one of the most important things to do. You need to start talking to people.
How often do you plan for differentiation, and what groups do you differentiate for?
Okay, so where we are in the world, and we're in international school, we have a lot of ELL kids, but we also have kids that are really well able as well. So you have to, in every lesson, there has to be something for all of these kids, okay? So the way, like if it's gonna be a lesson in my head that it's a really, really good lesson, it's something that the high achievers can actually benefit from, and as well that they're being pushed forward, that they're being extended, okay? So when I do any kind of assessment task or anything in class, there's always something that these kids can actually take away as well. They can do a little bit extra, or we're kind of stretching them a little bit. And I'm not saying giving them extra work to do, but it is about stretching them, okay? Getting them to think a little bit deeper and how they can apply that into whatever task it is. But then we also have the other end of the scale where we've got ELL kids who, and in this school we might have kids that have, like, they can maybe talk in sentences. Some of the kids will only be able to talk in words. So it is a lot of work with the language teachers. It is a lot of work to make sure that they're understanding, okay? We've got good kids in our school. We use translators a lot. If you're lucky enough to have a TA, they're great as well. But it is trying to, looking at hand gestures, looking at videos rather than lots of print. When they're doing writing tasks, changing that up so you can use a graphic organizer for it so that it's a little bit more scaffolded for them. And then also your expectations are going to be a little different for them as well. So you still want them to get that understanding, but they might not be able to do as much or go as deep as other kids in class. But once, like for, again, I'll move back to migration at the moment. So we're looking at how migration has an effect. So some of the kids will be able to tell you how it has an effect on cultures or communities or individuals. Whereas with the ELL kids, we're just looking to actually understand the concept of migration. Okay, so we talk a lot about, they've actually just migrated, they've just come to Japan. They're in a completely different environment. Do they actually understand the big idea, the conceptual understanding that migration is a response to something? It's either a challenge, a risk, or an opportunity.
Okay, how often do you include technology in your lesson plans?
It all depends on what they're doing, right? I try to do it as much as possible. We are pretty lucky that we can book out computers and stuff. I use the kids a lot because, I'll be honest, they actually know more about technology than I do. So like when we look at, so we've just started planning for our end of unit project, and like I've said to them, they're able to, because it's all about them making connections and taking action and stuff. So we want them to actually present the information. So they're all researching in groups at the moment, but they're allowed to present it whatever way they want. So I've given them an example, like they can make it, and this is quite old school when you say PowerPoint, but that's one example. But they can do a Prezi, they can use a poster if they want to. And then a few of them ask me, can they make a video? That's perfectly fine. Others, there's a program called eMaze that they want to use. I don't really know what it is, but I know they can present on it. So it's important that you're using it a lot, but it doesn't have to drive every single lesson, I don't think. But it is important that they have access to it and that they can present using technology as much as they want.
Sure. Do you usually plan a big end of unit summative assessment or several smaller summative assessments?
I tend to plan a big end of unit summative assessment, but then I would use formatives as my kind of the smaller assessments throughout. And again, when I say formative, I mean it's a snapshot of where they are. So I will look at a line of inquiry and see, I want to see exactly, do they know what this is? So I'll ask them a question and get them to do a quick assessment of it. It could be them speaking with each other or marking a rubric or something like that. But usually when it comes to a unit, I would do a big end of unit assessment. But then if I was doing a maths class, I wouldn't necessarily do a summative assessment. It would be smaller assessments along the way. And the same with language as well. If you're looking at like a narrative or an explanation, right? We would like pull them in groups and see exactly, okay, who's struggling, what do they need to know? Do they know the structure, or do they just not understand what an explanation is? Do we need to take them back? Can we move them forward? So it all depends on the class, really.
Okay. How often do you reflect on the effectiveness of a lesson plan and your students' learning?
Okay. I do a lot of reflections in my class. I do it for myself as a teacher, but I also get the kids to reflect as well. So I use a lot of Kathy Short's. She does this book called it's something about reflective thinking, but she's got lots of thinking routines inside there that I find very beneficial. It's very good for the kids. They can track their understanding themselves, see what they're still struggling at, because a lot of times they don't stop and think, what do I need to do next as well? And it's really important for them. So I use that a lot. I use the Harvard thinking routines quite a lot as well. I think their thinking routines are really good, and the visible thinking as well. It makes it very explicit for me, so I understand exactly what the kids are understanding, where we need to go next, what they're having difficulties with, what are they actually interested in, what are they excited by. I will reflect